The first thing he saw wasn't the girl. It was the sign nailed into a twisted mesquite trunk stained with something darker than rust. White man kills without warning. Each letter carved with a rage too focused to be drunk, too raw to be forgotten. And below it, something moved. A figure, slumped, not hanging limp like the dead, but swaying gently. Alive. Barely. Her arms were bound behind her, dislocated at strange angles. Feet grazed the dirt like a whisper. Around her throat, the rope wasn't tight enough to kill fast, just cruel enough to let death take its time. Behind her, a wind-chime. Not the kind you'd find outside a rancher's door. This one was made from bone, small and brittle coyote paws, maybe. Or something else, bits of copper threaded between them. It clinked faintly in the desert breeze, a haunting lullaby, a mockery of music. The rancher's horse snorted beneath him, uneasy. He didn't move. Not yet. He studied her face, what was left visible beneath streaks of red paint and dust. She was young. Apache, maybe 15, maybe 17. Her eyes were closed, lips cracked, blood dried on the corner of her mouth. She wasn't dead, not yet, but she'd been hung there to die slow, for someone to see. Or maybe no one at all. Something had taken its time here. He dismounted without a word. The land was dry enough to hear his boots crunch on gravel. He could feel the heat of the sun climbing up his spine, but the air felt still, not quiet, still like something was holding its breath. He walked toward her slow, deliberate steps, each one a choice. No rifle in his hands, no threat, and no law badge either. He didn't look away when he saw the welts beneath her ribs, or the open wound on her shoulder. He just reached up his knife, whispering from its sheath, and cut the rope. She collapsed. He caught her before she hit the dirt, cradling her weight like something holy, something fragile. She didn't make a sound, not even a groan. Her skin was hot, fevered, her breath shallow. The sign creaked above them. The bone chime clinked again. She flinched in his arms. That sound, something about it, pulled a twitch from her bloodied lip. A flicker behind her swollen eyelids, as if it echoed from something deeper than memory. He wrapped her in his coat, old wool, reeking of tobacco and horse sweat. He didn't care. No one else had come down this trail in weeks, maybe months. He'd chosen this route precisely because it led to nowhere. So who'd left her here? A statement, a warning, or maybe a punishment. He laid her across the saddle like a fallen fawn and tied her down gentle, careful not to press too hard on the bruises that ran like ink across her collarbone. Then he turned back, glanced at the sign once more. His knuckles whitened. He pulled the wind chime from the branch, didn't smash it, didn't toss it. He wrapped it in cloth and tucked it into his saddlebag. As he rode away, dust curling behind him in a quiet spiral, the tree stood bare, the sign still nailed above it, swaying slightly in the breeze. Alone now. The desert doesn't shout, it remembers. That night, inside his cabin a mile past the last outpost anyone remembered, he laid her gently on the only bed. His hands shook when he poured water into a bowl. Not from fear, from something else, something older. It had been a long time since he touched someone without aiming. He stared at her face. The red paint across her cheeks wasn't war paint. It was something else. Symbols, shapes, smears from hands. Marks left not by her, but by those who hurt her. He didn't ask why, didn't ask who. He just sat beside her in the lamplight and listened, not to her breath, but to that damn wind chime now hanging under his porch. It clinked every few minutes, uneven, hesitant, like it was learning to speak again. He leaned back in the chair, listening to that broken lullaby just outside the door, and for the first time in years, the silence inside the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like a question. She didn't open her eyes for 2 days. Not when he cleaned the gash across her side. Not when he fed the fire through the night to keep her warm. Not even when he whispered to the bone chime, asking it if it was cursed. He said nothing to her, because there was nothing that words could fix. And maybe he thought silence was the only thing she hadn't been hurt with. Outside, the land stretched bare and burnt under the July sun. Inside, the little cabin held a strange stillness, the kind that only comes when something sacred has been broken, but not destroyed. On the morning of the third day, he was mending tack beside the hearth, old fingers threading new leather. And that's when he heard it. A cough, dry, barely there. Then a scraping breath, then the sound of cloth shifting. He turned slow, like if he moved too fast, she'd vanish. She was sitting up, just barely. Her hair clung to her face. Blood had dried into the edges of her mouth, but her eyes swollen as they were held the glint of something untamed, not wild, not angry, just unbroken. She looked around the room like a trapped animal. Her hand twitched toward the bowl of water near the bed, but she didn't reach. He didn't move either, didn't offer, didn't speak. He simply turned the bowl an inch toward her, just enough, a silent offering. She didn't thank him. She just drank, slow and wary, eyes never leaving his. That was enough. He spent the rest of the day in small acts, chopping wood, fixing the door hinge, boiling herbs from a tin. She watched him, not like a child, like a scout, measuring every motion, every pause. When he brought her a small bowl of broth that night, she didn't touch it. But she didn't knock it over either. Progress in this place wasn't loud. As dusk fell, the desert wind curled in again, brushing the porch, nudging the old wind chime. It clinked once soft, metallic, dry-boned, and her gaze snapped to it. Her shoulders flinched, breath stalling. That sound, it pulled something from behind her rib. He noticed, and without a word, he stood, stepped outside, and unhooked the chime. But he didn't throw it away. He just set it inside the drawer near the stove, closed it quiet. A symbol locked away, not erased, just paused. That night, as the lamp burned low, he sat on the floor by the hearth, didn't sleep, didn't drink. He simply looked at her, not with pity, not with guilt, just with presence. There was something in him she didn't yet understand, something too still to be cruel, too worn to be naive. Maybe it was the way he never looked away from her scars, or maybe it was how his hands, though calloused, always hovered an inch away, careful never to touch without reason. She didn't know his name, didn't ask. He didn't know hers. But the next morning, when he placed a fresh bowl of soup beside her, she took it with both hands. She drank it without shaking, and when he turned to leave the room, her voice stopped him, low, hoarse. "Why didn't you leave me there?" He turned, the doorway framing him in morning light, dust caught in golden streaks around his shoulders. When he didn't answer right away, he just looked at her. Really looked, and then, with a voice so dry it cracked, he said, "Because someone already did." Then he walked out into the morning, the silence behind him now heavier, but kinder. He spent the day working the old well, drawing water to wash the blood-stained bed sheets. Each stain was a story, one he didn't ask about. She sat in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, watching. She still didn't trust him. Not really. But she didn't flinch when he passed her, didn't recoil when his shadow crossed hers. Small mercies, hard-earned. By dusk, she was able to walk to the edge of the porch. She stared at the drawer. That damn chime. The sound haunted her. But part of her wanted to hear it again, just once, to remember what it had meant before. She didn't open the drawer. Not yet. But her fingers brushed its handle, slow and silent, and from inside, the faintest metallic tap, like a memory knocking gently. That night, as the fire dimmed, he laid the old blanket across her shoulders without a word. Her fingers brushed his for a breath too long. Neither pulled away. The third time she woke up crying. She didn't even realize it. Tears bled from her closed eyes. Her breath hitched in silence, like she'd trained herself never to scream. When he walked into the room carrying a kettle of warm water, he didn't ask, didn't speak. He just knelt beside her again. And for the first time, she didn't flinch. He dipped a cloth into the basin, wrung it out with hands that had once broken bones but now shook not to hurt, and pressed it gently to her shoulder. Her skin twitched, but she didn't pull away. She looked at him no longer with suspicion, not yet with trust, but something in between. Like the space between lightning and thunder, the cloth moved in slow circles. Steam rose between them. It smelled of pine ash, sage, and iron. He cleaned the cuts that hadn't healed right, the ones someone else had left in a fury, the kind of wounds meant to scar. She said nothing, but her eyes drifted closed again, not from weakness, from something closer to peace. His touch wasn't soft, but it was careful, and that care in its quietness was louder than any apology. Later that afternoon, he brought out a small tin from a crate in the corner. Inside, a glass jar filled with thick salve, bear grease and juniper, something he'd learned from an old woman in Montana. Long ago, it smelled like memory. She lay on her stomach, shirt lifted halfway. The angry bruises down her back no longer vivid purple, but sickly yellow-green. His fingers hesitated. Then, with reverence, he rubbed the salve across her skin. The sound of breath passed between them, hers hitching, his steady. Each motion was deliberate, unspoken, like he was trying to erase what had been carved into her. But he never touched too long, never lingered. The line between healing and holding was never crossed. Outside, the wind picked up. The bone chime inside the drawer rattled softly as if it, too, wanted to breathe again. She heard it. Her lips parted. Her gaze flicked to the drawer, then back to his hands, and still. She said nothing. That night, she walked barefoot onto the porch, not hiding in the doorway, not peeking from behind a blanket. She stood, straight-backed, the moonlight touching her shoulders. He looked up from the log he was splitting, said nothing, just nodded. She stared into the desert, arms crossed, then finally broke the silence. "What's your name?" He paused, hands resting on the axe handle, looked up with eyes more silver than blue in the moonlight. "Elias." The name settled like dust in warm air. She nodded, whispered something back. He stepped closer. "What was that?" She looked at him then, really looked. Her voice cracked like old leather. "Niwena." Elias nodded once, like a prayer, then sat beside her on the porch, two shadows under a bleeding sky. At dawn, he found her by the stove, trying to boil water. She'd never used iron kettles before, not like this. The flames licked her sleeve and she jerked back with a hiss. He rushed in, not yelling, not scolding, just blowing on the fabric and guiding her arm gently away. She looked at him, embarrassed, but he just smiled, faint and dry. "Fire listens better when you ask, not when you force." She laughed. The sound caught both of them off guard. It was the first time either had heard it. Short, almost bitter, but real. They ate together in silence, not awkward, not painful, just shared. As days passed, the chime inside the drawer began to feel different. No longer a threat, no longer an echo of terror. One evening, when Elias was out feeding the horse, Niwena opened the drawer. She didn't flinch this time. She lifted the chime slowly, letting it catch the firelight. The bones were bleached white, small notches carved into one. Symbol, old, Apache. The copper wires had bent with time. But in her hand, it didn't feel evil. It felt familiar. A piece of something lost. She didn't hang it back on the porch, not yet. But she left it on the windowsill. Let the breeze tap it gently now and then, a shy music creeping back into the cabin. Elias noticed it later that night. He didn't say a word. Just looked at her, not with surprise, with understanding. And in that glance, something passed between them. A kind of permission. That night, while she slept, Elias carved a small piece of wood. He traced the bone chime's pattern into it, carefully, as if trying to understand its language. She didn't plan to speak. Not ever. Not really. Some things sit in the throat like stones too heavy to lift, too sharp to swallow. But one night, After a silence so long it had begun to feel like a third presence in the cabin, Niwena spoke. Not to Elias. Not at first. She was sitting near the hearth, watching the flames slow dance. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers stained with the blue of crushed berries she'd used to dye thread that morning. The wind brushed past the cabin. The bone chime on the windowsill gave a small, brittle voice, and she whispered, "They painted me to make me theirs." Elias froze. He was halfway through cutting a length of twine. The blade stopped against the table. She didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the fire. They held me down, laughing. Red across my chest, down my legs, hands, covered. Not war paint, not for battle. A breath caught in her throat. It was to mock, to shame. So no man, Apache or white, would touch what they touched. Her voice didn't tremble. It shattered. Elias sat down, but not too close. She didn't need arms around her. Not yet. He waited. She continued, the words now a slow bleed. They took me after a raid. Not mine, another village. Said it didn't matter, Apache's Apache. Burned the huts, took the women, left the children to starve. A long silence. One of them wore a necklace, a wind chime, said it was souvenir. She turned to look at the chime now sitting in the window. Her eyes didn't blink. That's not decoration. It's burial music. We hang it near the graves, so the dead don't forget the sound of home. Elias swallowed. His mouth was dry. Where did they find it? He asked gently. Niwena's voice was flat, empty. My family's resting place. Outside, the wind rose not sharp, not angry, just persistent. It carried sand across the porch, rustling the grass. And with it, the bone chime clicked twice, then fell silent. She stared at it. "That's not yours," she whispered. Elias nodded. "I know." She turned to him then, and her face broke not into tears, but into rage. "You hung it on your port, like it was nothing." "I didn't know." Her breath trembled now. "You should have." He didn't defend himself, didn't explain. Instead, he stood and walked outside. Minutes passed. When he returned, he held the chime, but something had changed. He'd wrapped it in a cloth of soft red, the color of mourning among her people. He set it down between them, and then he bowed his head. Not a gesture taught in the army. Not one used in town meetings or churches. It was low, humble, shameful. She watched him, then picked up the cloth-wrapped chime and placed it near the fire. Let the warmth touch it again. A new memory. That night, Elias brought out a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside a single photograph, a letter, and a rusted medallion. He set them on the table between them. Didn't explain, didn't frame it with a speech. She picked up the photo. A younger Elias, in uniform, standing with three others. One wore a badge. Another had the same haunted eyes Elias wore now. "Fort Ruidoso," he said quietly. 1872. I wasn't the worst, but I wasn't the one who stopped it either. Niwena set the photo down. What changed? Elias looked at her. "You." The silence between them no longer hurt. It breathed. When she rose to leave the table, her fingers brushed the chime again. This time, no flinch, just stillness. She turned to Elias. "There's a word for men like you," she said softly. "Ones who carry the shame they didn't earn. Ones who lift things they didn't break." He waited. She didn't translate, but her tone held something close to respect, or maybe forgiveness. Later, while he slept in the chair by the fire, she took the chime and opened the cloth. One by one, she removed the bones. Some were cracked, others intact. She laid them in a circle on the floor, and in the center, she placed a copper bead, one that had fallen loose from the wire. Then, with the small awl Elias had used for leather work, she began carving again. Not for burial this time, but for memory, a reclaiming. At sunrise, Elias awoke to find her still kneeling by the circle of bones. She didn't look at him, but her hand reached for the chime. and held it out. Together, they began to rebuild it. The desert doesn't forgive quickly, Pacham, but sometimes it forgets just enough for something new to grow. It had been 3 weeks since the rope had been cut. 3 weeks of quiet hands, stitched words, and long days that didn't speak unless spoken to. And in that space, somewhere between caution and comfort, something began to stir. Niwena didn't smile, but her silences no longer felt like walls. They felt like a woman remembering what safety used to taste like. Elias noticed the change in small ways. The way she swept the porch in the evenings, barefoot, letting the sand bite her toes like it used to in childhood. The way she hummed, barely audible, while stitching the copper wires back through the wind-chime's frame. A tune with no lyrics. A song only she seemed to know. And one evening, the way her hand reached for his, mid-supper. No storm outside, no trigger, just her hand, drifting toward his, hovering just above the table, then stopping. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from hope that didn't know where to land. Elias didn't move, didn't grab her, didn't finish what she started. He let the moment hang uncertain. Unfinished like the final note of her humming, Niwena slowly withdrew her hand, cheeks flushed. But her eyes didn't drop. Instead, she looked at him and said, "If you touch me, it can't be out of guilt." He nodded. "I know." She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms. "I'm not yours to fix." His voice came low. "I'm not trying to fix you." A pause. "I just don't want you to keep walking alone." Her lips twitched, not a smile but something adjacent. "And if I want to?" Elias shrugged gently. "Then I'll walk behind." Quiet. Later that night, as the wind picked up, the reassembled chime clinked softly outside. Not harsh, not haunted, just curious. Like it, too, was testing what it meant to sing again. Inside, Niwena sat by the fire with the blanket around her shoulders. Elias carved another piece of cedar, a bird this time. A wren, small and scrappy. She watched his hands, then said softly, "There was a boy, back in my village. He used to carve birds like that." Elias glanced up. "Was he?" She nodded. "Gone, long before they painted me." Silence fell. "Then I didn't love him. Not really. But I thought I would someday." Her eyes drifted toward Elias. "And now, I don't know what that word means anymore." He stopped carving. "It means different things to different folks." He said, "For some it's loud, big, burning." He met her gaze. "For me, it's just showing up. Every damn day, whether it's easy or not." The next morning the sky hung low. Storms threatened in the distance. Clouds rolled over the hills like cattle herded by unseen hands. Elias handed her a rifle, not loaded, just held out. She took it, confused. "You ever fired one?" he asked. She nodded once. He pointed at a can 50 feet away. "Show me." She squinted, raised the rifle. Finger on the trigger. Exhale. Pause. Crack. The can flipped into the air and rolled 10 more feet. He whistled low. "You're better than I was at your age." She smirked, not a full smile, but the closest yet. "You were never my age." That made him laugh. The sound broke across the plain like a window opening. That evening, a thunderstorm crawled closer. Inside the cabin, Niwena stood near the doorway, hair lit by firelight. Elias approached. She didn't step back. His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's no rush." She looked at him. "I know." She reached for his hand again, and this time she didn't pause. Their fingers touched, not grasping, just held, like two people remembering how to be human again. The lightning cracked above the ridge. Rain tapped the rooftop like hesitant fingertips. Outside, the bone chime danced in the wind, and for the first time, its song didn't sound like warning. It sounded like permission. The next morning, they found boot prints in the mud near the water trough. Not his, not hers. Fresh, wide-gated, unmistakable. She looked at Elias, And this time, her fingers tightened around his hand not in tenderness but in fear. The boot prints circled the trough once, then again, as if someone had stood there for a while, watching. Elias crouched near them, pressing 2 fingers into the heel. Still wet, maybe 6 hours old, and deep the kind of depth a man makes when carrying iron. His jaw tightened. He stood, turned to Nowina. How many men did you see the night they hung you? She hesitated. 3, maybe 4. Any of them wear a vest with silver snaps. Her face paled. Yes. Elias nodded. He didn't ask more. He went inside, opened a trunk beneath the floorboards. Inside an old rifle, a box of shells, and something older, a folded letter sealed in wax. Never opened. He left the letter behind. By noon, the wind had picked up again. Not curious, not gentle, it bit at the edges of the cabin. Rattling windows. The bone chime sang sharply. Elias stood at the doorway, rifle across his back, the shadow of his frame casting long across the porch. He wasn't hiding. He was inviting. A line drawn in dust. Behind him, Nowina stood near the hearth, watching. Should we leave? She asked. He shook his head. They came looking for blood. A beat. They'll find it. They arrived just before sundown. 3 men on horseback, 1 mule behind them. No badges, no uniforms, just guns, and grins that looked too eager for the desert. The one in front, silver snaps glinting on his vest, tipped his hat as they dismounted. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think you were the take-in strays kind. Elias didn't respond. Silver snaps glanced past him. Spotted Nowina in the shadows of the cabin. Well, looky there. Didn't think she'd be walking. We were real gentle, honest. Just wanted to teach a little lesson. He turned back to Elias, tone darkening. Now we gotta finish it. Elias stepped forward. You hung her like a message. Now you got your reply. Silver Snaps chuckled. You think we're scared of a washed-up war dog and some Apache girl with a chime. That last word chime hit Nowina like a lash. Her grip on the rifle tightened. She stepped onto the porch beside Elias. The men laughed. Oh, she's got teeth now, ain't that sweet? But Elias wasn't looking at them anymore. He was watching the chime swaying violently above them. The same chime they'd called a souvenir, the one they stole from the bones of her kin. He raised his rifle, not at Silver Snaps, at the chime. Crack. The bullet shattered the frame. Copper wires snapped. Bones flew into the dusk. The chime died, silenced. Finally, not by fear, but choice. Nowina gasped. Her hand shot toward him. But Elias turned to her, voice low. It was never meant to warn them. He faced the men again. It was meant for me. Gunfire exploded. Dust leapt from the earth. Bullets tore through the edge of the porch. Elias dropped to a knee, returned fire quick, precise. Nowina screamed his name once, raw, and fired too. The mule bolted. 1 man fell. Another circled wide, tried to flank the cabin. She darted inside, grabbed the spare rifle from the wall. Her hands bled from a split in her palm. But she didn't stop. Outside, Elias took a bullet in the shoulder. Fell, rolled, fired again. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripping into the dry wood of the porch. Silver Snaps advanced. You always were the bleeding heart. Elias, now you're just bleeding. He aimed. Nowina stepped out and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder. Silver Snaps spun, stumbled, fell to his knees, coughing blood. She walked forward, rifle steady. He looked up at her eyes wide, lips trembling. She didn't blink. You painted me red, she whispered. Now it's your turn. 1 last shot. Silence returned, but not the kind they used to know. This one felt earned. Elias lay on his back, hand pressed to his wound. Nowina knelt beside him, breath shaking. You stayed, she whispered. His eyes fluttered. Course I did. They buried the bodies far from the house. No markers, no prayers, just dust and distance. That night, Elias sat in a rocking chair, arm bandaged, eyes heavy. Nuena stepped outside. In her hands a new chime, not bone, not copper, but wood, soft cedar, strung with tiny carved feathers and etched beads. She hung it on the porch. The wind caught it gently. It didn't sing. It whispered as Elias drifted into sleep. Nuena sat beside him, her hand wrapped around his. No words passed, only breath, and between them that whisper of wood in wind. It took Elias 3 weeks to stand without wincing. The bullet had passed clean, but not gently. He moved like a man stitched back together by ghosts. Nuena watched him every day. Not like a nurse. Like someone making sure her reason to stay hadn't died beneath her feet. The cabin changed in small ways. The chime, the new one, hung soft and low. It didn't beg to be heard. It waited. And when the wind moved right, it let out a hush like breath between lovers. She carved it herself. Tiny feathers, pine beads. One sliver of bone hidden inside the wood, not for memory, for balance. Elias never asked her why she chose cedar. She never explained, but every time he sat on the porch, he'd glance at it and smile faintly. Like someone remembering a song he once heard in a dream. Summer bled into a cooler dusk. One morning, Elias walked outside, stretching stiff arms. He saw her kneeling in the dirt behind the house. She wasn't planting crops. She was burying something. Carefully, reverently, he approached in silence, boots crunching over dry stone. She looked up, held out her palm. In it a silver snap, one she'd pulled from the dead man's vest before burying him. She placed it into the soil, covered it, packed it down, then whispered, "So it can't harm the wind anymore." Elias said nothing, but his hand reached for hers, and this time she didn't pause. They built a small corral that fall, not for horses, for goats. Nuena had asked for them, said they reminded her of laughter, unpredictable, stupid, joyful. Elias didn't argue. He ordered lumber from the nearest town, sent by wagon. When the driver asked who the supplies were for, Elias only replied, "Home." It was the first time he'd used the word in years. In the evenings, they sat outside. Sometimes she sang in her language, low and slow. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the pain they carried and the way they bent toward healing him. One night, as the last orange streak left the sky, she touched his chest and asked, "Do you still see the sign?" He closed his eyes. That tree, that girl, that curse, the sign above her head. "White man kills without warning." He nodded. "I see it, every day." She leaned in, forehead to his. "Good," she whispered. "Then it can never be hung again." That winter, the snow came early, not heavy, just enough to soften the bones of the land. Elias carved her name into a piece of oak, burned the letters in slow, even strokes. Nuena. She hung it above the cabin door, not beside his. Above them both. No one in town ever came to ask questions. The men who might have died with that silver snap gang. No sheriff ever rode up that path. Some wounds heal in places the law doesn't reach. Some justice walks on bare feet, leaving no prints. Spring returned. The cedar chime now carried a different voice. It didn't cry anymore. It hummed, like the heartbeat of a life not stolen, but chosen. One morning, Elias caught her standing in the doorway, eyes wet. He asked her why. She pointed to the chime. "It's the same wind," she said, "but it sounds beautiful now." He stepped beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Because it's not singing for the dead anymore." She nodded. "It's singing for us. And maybe that's all love really is. Not loud, not flashy. Just two people who've survived hell, building something soft enough to live in. It's not the land that was cursed. It was the silence. There are wounds that time alone can't heal. Some hurts settle deep in the ribs, in the quiet corners of memory, where words don't reach. This story isn't just about a rancher or an Apache girl. It's about what happens when two broken things refuse to stay broken together. Elias didn't save Nuena with bullets or bravery. He saved her with presence, with silence that didn't demand, with hands that asked permission, and Nuena didn't just recover, she rebuilt. Not only herself, but him. Sometimes the past cannot be fixed, only carried. But how we carry it, who we carry it with, makes all the difference. The bone chime that once sang of death became something else. Not erased, but transformed. That's the lesson. Pain doesn't vanish, but it can be rewritten. If you're still haunted by the sounds of your past, maybe the answer isn't to silence them, but to teach them a new song, because the wind keeps blowing, whether we listen or not.